Today, we're going to tackle a really tough subject: how a marriage can fall apart. Now, I know this isn't easy stuff, but understanding the process can sometimes help make sense of all the pain and confusion. We're drawing on some really insightful material here from Class 2 of the Exploring Beyond Divorce video course, which is based on the teachings of Ronnie Kaufman. So let's dive in.
So here's the first big idea we really need to grab onto. The end of a marriage, it's almost never just one big single event. It's a process. It unfolds over time. And just knowing that, just seeing that there are stages to it, can sometimes bring a little bit of clarity when everything else feels so chaotic and emotional. All right, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to look at a three-stage framework. You can think of it like a map that shows how a marriage can slowly unravel over time. And here are those three stages: disillusionment, erosion, and detachment. We're going to break down what each of these really means because they definitely build on one another. This is our roadmap for the next few minutes. Okay, but here's a really crucial point. This is not a straight line. It's not like you just neatly go from stage 1 to 2 to 3 and then you're done. No way. Relationships often cycle back and forth between these stages, sometimes for a long time. And you know what often fuels that cycle? A failure to really handle conflict when it comes up. So let's talk about stage 1, disillusionment. You know how in the beginning everything seems pretty close to perfect? Well, this is when those rose-colored glasses really start to crack. And look, a little bit of that is totally normal in any long-term relationship. But in this process, it goes deeper. You start to feel this real unhappiness because the reality of your partner, and maybe even the reality of yourself, doesn't match up with that idealized version you had in your head. And when you feel that way, trying to fix things can just start to feel pointless. Then, things can move into the second stage, erosion. This is where you might see that painful dance, the push and the pull. Couples move away from each other, but then they come back together over and over again. It is absolutely exhausting. And this is also the stage where some really destructive, toxic communication habits can take hold. And we'll get to those in a second. The whole feeling of the relationship just shifts. It's no longer about if we can fix this. It's more like a constant nagging question of when or if it's all finally going to end. And that leads right into the final stage, detachment. The key word here is ambivalence. That constant feeling of uncertainty. It just becomes the new normal. The emotional connection that used to be there just weakens and weakens. You might start to feel apathy or just a general disinterest where passion or care used to be. And that's when you start, maybe without even fully realizing it, to emotionally and mentally prepare for a life apart. You start anticipating leaving. Now, I mentioned that destructive communication patterns really pop up during that erosion phase. Well, the source material identifies 4 specific behaviors that are incredibly damaging. Let's take a look at what these enemies of a relationship are.
Here they are: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And they're called enemies for a very good reason. See, criticism isn't just complaining. It's an attack on your partner's character. Contempt, well, that's even more corrosive. That's mockery, sarcasm, disrespect. Then there's defensiveness, which is all about shifting blame, refusing to take any responsibility. And finally, stonewalling, which is when one person just completely shuts down, builds a wall, and withdraws. When these 4 show up to the party, they just pour fuel on the fire and speed everything up.
Understanding the stages is one thing, but actually living through them is something else entirely. The emotional journey can be a total roller coaster. So let's just take a moment to talk about some of the really common, often overwhelming feelings that go along with this whole process. It can feel like a complete storm of conflicting emotions inside. It's so common to experience anticipatory grief. That's when you're mourning the loss before it's even final. You might feel denial, which is a powerful defense against the pain. And of course, there's often deep anger and sadness. And like we saw in the detachment phase, that feeling of apathy, of just being numb, can set in. The big thing to remember is that seeing these as part of the process can help normalize what often feels like a very isolating experience. So we have this framework. Now what? How can we actually use it? Well, this last part is all about turning this knowledge into some personal insight. And it all starts with that word we saw back in stage 1, illusion. First, let's just get on the same page. An illusion is basically something that's wrongly perceived or interpreted. In a relationship, these are the false beliefs or the idealized images that we hold about our partner, about ourselves, and about the relationship as a whole. So let's start the reflection right here. Thinking back, maybe even to the very beginning, what were some of the illusions you might have held about your partner? What did you believe they were, or what did you think they would become that maybe didn't quite align with reality over time? Okay, now let's turn the lens inward. This one can be tough, but it's so important. What false illusions might you have projected about yourself, especially early on? How did you present yourself in a way that perhaps wasn't the complete and total picture? And for the final question, let's try to consider the other perspective. Based on their words or their actions, what false illusions do you think your partner held about you? What expectations might they have had that you could never realistically meet? Just thinking about these can be a huge step towards understanding. Let's close with this powerful thought from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Understanding this process of disintegration, it's not about assigning blame, it's about finding clarity. And it's through that clarity, even after a really painful loss, that there is so much potential for growth and for finding your way out. Thanks for joining me.